The sound of buzzards circling overhead made Samuel Kincaid rein in his horse, his weathered hand moving instinctively toward the rifle on his saddle. Spring in Montana territory could be treacherous in 1876, and whatever had drawn those scavengers meant trouble on his land. He'd been riding the northern fence line of his ranch when he spotted them, their dark wings cutting lazy circles against the endless blue sky. Samuel had survived 32 years by trusting his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him to be careful. The Montana wilderness stretched out in every direction from his 1,000-acre spread, beautiful and unforgiving in equal measure. He'd built his ranch 5 miles from the nearest settlement, a small trading post called Breckenridge that served as the closest thing to civilization for 50 miles in any direction. As he guided his mare down into the ravine where the buzzards were descending, the smell hit him first. Death had a distinctive odor that every man who'd lived through the war between the states recognized immediately. Samuel's jaw tightened as he dismounted, tying his horse to a scrub pine, before moving forward on foot. The wagon was overturned, one wheel still spinning slowly in the morning breeze. Bodies lay scattered across the clearing, and Samuel felt his stomach turn despite all the carnage he'd witnessed in his life. Men, women, even children had been caught in whatever violence had erupted here. From the looks of it, they'd been dead maybe 2 or 3 days. The wagon train had probably been heading west toward Oregon when raiders hit them. Samuel counted 6 bodies initially, then stopped counting. It didn't matter how many. What mattered was giving them a proper burial and reporting this to the territorial marshal when one eventually passed through Breckenridge again. He just turned back toward his horse to get his shovel when he heard it. A whimper. Quiet, terrified, barely audible over the wind. His hand went to his pistol as he spun around, eyes scanning the wreckage. There, behind the overturned wagon, hidden in a hollow beneath the wooden frame, something moved. Samuel approached slowly, keeping his weapon ready. Raiders sometimes circled back to their kills. "I'm not going to hurt you," he called out, his voice rough from years of little use. "I'm a rancher. My land starts about a mile south of here." The whimpering stopped, replaced by the sound of ragged breathing. Samuel knelt down, peering into the shadows beneath the wagon. A pair of eyes stared back at him, wide with terror and exhaustion. A woman. Young from what he could see, her face streaked with dirt and what looked like dried blood. "Madam, I need you to come out from there. Those buzzards will get bolder once the sun gets higher." The woman didn't move, just continued staring at him with those haunted eyes. Samuel holstered his weapon slowly, raising both hands to show he meant no harm. "My name is Samuel Kincaid. I run a cattle ranch south of here. I can help you, but you need to come out." Still nothing. Samuel could see her trembling even from several feet away. Whatever she'd witnessed had broken something inside her. He recognized that look. He'd seen it on soldiers' faces during the war, men who'd seen too much death, experienced too much horror. "Were you with this wagon train?" he asked gently. A small nod. "Are there any other survivors?" A shake of her head, followed by a sob that she quickly stifled as if afraid the sound itself might bring danger. "All right. I'm going to back up a bit, give you some space. But madam, you can't stay here. The elements will kill you if nothing else does. I have a ranch house with a good fire, food, and water. You'll be safe there." The woman's voice came out as a croak. "Safe? Yes, madam, I give you my word." "No such thing," she whispered, but she was moving now, crawling out from beneath the wagon with painful slowness. When she finally emerged into the sunlight, Samuel had to work to keep his expression neutral. She was in bad shape. Her dress was torn and filthy, her dark hair matted with dried blood. Cuts and bruises covered her exposed skin, and she moved like someone who'd taken a beating. But despite all that, Samuel could see she was probably around 24 or 25 years old, with delicate features and those striking green eyes that had first caught his attention. She swayed on her feet, and he moved forward instinctively to steady her. The moment his hand touched her arm, she jerked away with a cry of terror. "Don't touch me. Please don't touch me." Samuel stepped back immediately, hands raised again. "I won't, I'm sorry, but you need help and you need it soon. When's the last time you had water?" The woman seemed to consider this, her brow furrowing as if the question was too complex to answer. I'm not sure, days maybe. There's a canteen on my saddle, I'm going to get it for you. Don't run. You won't survive out here alone." He retrieved the canteen and brought it back, setting it on the ground a few feet from where she stood. She grabbed it with shaking hands and drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. When she finally lowered it, some clarity had returned to her gaze. "They killed everyone," she said, her voice hollow. "They came at dawn. We didn't even have time to circle the wagons properly. The men tried to fight, but there were so many of them. Raiders," she nodded. "They took the horses, the supplies, killed anyone who resisted. I hid in the flour barrel in my family's wagon. I could hear." She broke off, her whole body beginning to shake. Samuel wanted to comfort her, but he knew better than to try touching her again. "You don't have to tell me now. Right now, we need to get you somewhere safe and warm. Can you ride?" "I think so." "Good. My mare is gentle. She won't spook on you." He started walking toward where he'd tied his horse, then paused when he realized the woman wasn't following. She was staring at the bodies scattered across the clearing, tears streaming down her face. "I should bury them," she said. "They deserve that much. I'll come back tomorrow with men from town. We'll do it right, but you need care first or you'll be joining them." The harsh words seemed to break through her shock. She took a stumbling step toward him, then another. When she reached his horse, she looked up at the animal with obvious apprehension. "I'll help you up, but I need to touch you to do it. Is that all right?" The woman was silent for a long moment, then gave a jerky nod. "Yes." Samuel kept his movements slow and predictable, placing his hands on her waist to lift her into the saddle. Even through the layers of her dress, he could feel how thin she was, how her ribs stood out prominently. She'd been without food for too long. Once she was settled, he swung up behind her, careful to leave space between them. "What's your name, madam?" "Grace. Grace Zimmerman." "Well, Miss Zimmerman, let's get you home." The ride back to the ranch house took nearly an hour. Grace sat stiffly in front of him, her body tense and trembling. Every time Samuel shifted in the saddle, she flinched. He found himself talking to fill the silence, pointing out landmarks even though he doubted she was truly listening. "That's the North Pasture. I run about 200 head of cattle, mostly longhorns. Hardy animals, good for this climate. The ranch house is just over that ridge. Built it myself 4 years ago when I mustered out and came west." Grace said nothing, but he felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders as the house came into view. It wasn't much, just a solid log structure with a stone chimney, but it represented safety and shelter. Samuel had built it to last through Montana's brutal winters, with thick walls and a good roof. He helped her down from the horse, noting how she swayed on her feet. The woman was running on pure willpower at this point. He led her inside, grateful that he'd at least cleaned the place the week before. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and his few pieces of furniture arranged around it. "There's a bedroom through that door," he said, pointing. "It has a proper bed and clean sheets. You can rest there." Grace looked at the bedroom door, then back at Samuel, fear flickering across her face again. "Where will you be?" "I have a bedroll. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "You won't." She trailed off, unable to finish the question. Samuel understood. "Miss Zimmerman, You have my word as a gentleman and a Christian man that I will not harm you in any way. You're safe here. Tomorrow I'll ride into Breckenridge and see if there's a woman in town who can come stay with you for a while, help you recover." Some of the fear eased from her expression. "Thank you. When's the last time you ate?" Grace had to think about this. "Before the attack, 3 days ago, maybe 4. The days have blurred together." Samuel moved to his small kitchen area, pulling out what supplies he had. "I can make some broth. Your stomach won't handle much more than that right now. While I do that, there's a wash basin in the bedroom and a pitcher of water. You can clean up if you'd like." Grace nodded and moved toward the bedroom with shuffling steps. Samuel watched her go, feeling a mixture of pity and anger. What kind of animals attacked a civilian wagon train? He'd seen plenty of violence during the war, but at least then there had been some pretense of honor, of fighting against armed opponents. This was just murder. He set about making the broth, using some of the beef bones he'd been saving and adding herbs from the small garden plot behind the house. The familiar routine of cooking helped settle his own nerves. He hadn't been lying when he told Grace she was safe, but having a woman in his house was going to take some adjustment. Samuel had lived alone since coming to Montana, preferring solitude to the complications that came with other people. When Grace emerged from the bedroom about 30 minutes later, she looked slightly better. She'd washed the worst of the dirt from her face and hands, though dried blood still matted her dark hair. Her dress was beyond saving, torn and stained beyond repair. "I have some spare clothes that might work," Samuel said, ladling broth into a bowl. "Shirts and trousers. They'll be too big, but they're clean. Thank you." Grace sat at the rough wooden table, accepting the bowl with trembling hands. She sipped the broth slowly, and Samuel could see her body responding to the warmth and nutrition. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently. "I'll need details when I report this to the authorities." Grace was quiet for so long that Samuel thought she might not answer. Then she began speaking, her voice flat and emotionless as she recounted the horror. "We were part of a 20-wagon train heading to Oregon. Families mostly, people looking for new starts. We'd been traveling for 6 weeks, making good time. The wagon master said we'd be through the mountain passes before the weather turned." She took another sip of broth. 3 mornings ago, we camped in that ravine. The wagon master didn't like it, said it made us too vulnerable, but we needed water for the animals and the creek there was the only source for miles." Samuel nodded, picturing the scene. "They hit us just after dawn. At least 20 men, maybe more. They came from both sides of the ravine, trapping us. The men in our train tried to defend us, but they weren't fighters, most of them. Farmers, merchants, men who'd never fired a gun in anger." Her hands tightened on the bowl. "They killed them first. Shot them down while they were still grabbing their rifles. Then they went through the wagons, taking anything of value." "Did you see their faces? Could you identify them?" Grace shook her head. "They wore bandanas over their faces, but I heard them talking. They weren't Indians like some people claimed raiders always were. These were white men speaking English. One of them had a scar on his hand, I saw that much. A burned scar that covered his whole left hand." Samuel filed that information away. "How did you survive?" "My father. He was a careful man. When we heard the first shots, he grabbed me and my mother, tried to get us to hide. But my mother panicked, ran toward my younger sister who was in another wagon. One of the raiders shot her." Grace's voice finally cracked, emotion breaking through. "She just fell. Didn't even cry out. My father pushed me into the flour barrel and told me to stay quiet no matter what I heard." Tears were flowing freely now, and Samuel quietly pushed a clean cloth across the table toward her. Grace used it to wipe her eyes, but the tears kept coming. I stayed in that barrel for what felt like hours. I heard screaming, gunshots, and other sounds I don't want to remember, then silence. I waited until dark before I climbed out. By then, the raiders were long gone and everyone was. She couldn't finish. You don't have to say more. I hid under the wagon. I kept thinking someone would come, another wagon train or soldiers or someone. But no one did, just the buzzards. Samuel let her cry, keeping a respectful distance while she processed the trauma. When her tears finally subsided, he spoke quietly. "You survived, Miss Zimmerman. That takes strength. Your father saved your life and now you have to honor that by living it." Grace looked at him with those haunted green eyes. "I don't feel strong. I feel broken. Broken things can be mended. It takes time, but it's possible. I've seen it." She studied his face, really looking at him for the first time. Samuel was conscious of his appearance, his weathered features and the scar that ran along his jaw from a Confederate saber. His dark hair needed cutting, and he probably looked as rough as any frontier rancher. "You were in the war," Grace said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, madam, Union cavalry. I mustered out in '65 and drifted west, ended up here." "Did you see terrible things?" Samuel met her gaze steadily. "Yes, things that gave me nightmares for years. Still do sometimes. But I'm still here and so are you. That counts for something." Grace finished her broth and set the bowl down. "I don't want to be alone tonight. I know that's improper, but every time I close my eyes, I see them, hear them. I'll keep the fire going and sit right here at the table. You can sleep in the bedroom with the door open if that helps. I won't move from this spot, you have my word." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid. Samuel is fine. Then you should call me Grace." Over the next few hours, Samuel kept his promise. He sat at the table, maintaining the fire and occasionally checking on Grace through the open bedroom door. She tossed and turned, crying out once or twice in her sleep. Each time, Samuel spoke quietly from his seat, not moving closer but letting her know she wasn't alone. "It's all right, Grace. You're safe. Just a dream." His voice seemed to soothe her, and she'd settle back into restless sleep. Samuel used the time to think about what needed to be done. Tomorrow he'd ride to Breckenridge and report the massacre. The territorial marshal would need to be notified, though Samuel doubted they'd catch whoever did this. The raiders had too much of a head start, and Montana was vast enough to swallow a dozen gangs of outlaws. More importantly, he needed to find someone to help Grace. A woman's presence would do her good, someone she could talk to about things she probably couldn't discuss with a man. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store in Breckenridge, was a kind soul. Maybe she'd be willing to come out to the ranch for a few days. As dawn broke, Samuel was still sitting at the table, having dozed off and on through the night. He heard movement from the bedroom and looked up to see Grace standing in the doorway. She looked slightly better with sleep, though dark circles still shadowed her eyes. "You kept your word," she said softly. "I always do." "I need to wash properly. Is there a place I can bathe?" Samuel stood, stretching his stiff muscles. "I have a washtub in the barn. I can heat water on the fire and bring it out there. It's not fancy, but it's private." "That would be wonderful." He set about heating multiple pots of water while Grace sat by the fire, wrapped in one of his spare blankets. When he had enough, he carried the heavy pots out to the barn, filling the old copper tub he used for laundry. He brought out soap, clean towels, and one of his shirts that would serve as a makeshift robe. "Take as long as you need," he said. "I'll be in the house." Grace touched his arm briefly, the first time she'd initiated contact. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything." He nodded and headed back inside, giving her privacy. While she bathed, he made a more substantial breakfast of eggs and biscuits left over from the day before. He also went to his small trunk in the bedroom and pulled out the spare clothes he'd mentioned. a shirt and pair of trousers that had been too small for him even when he'd bought them years ago. When Grace returned to the house, her wet hair hanging loose down her back, she looked more like the young woman she was and less like a victim of violence. The borrowed shirt hung nearly to her knees, and she'd rolled the trouser legs up several times, but the clothes were clean and whole. "I feel almost human again," she said, managing a small smile. "You look better. Eat some breakfast, then I need to ride into town. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" The fear flickered across her face again. "How long will you be gone?" "4 hours at most." "Breckenridge is only about 5 miles east. I need to report what happened and see if Mrs. Henderson from the general store can come stay with you for a while." Grace sat at the table, pulling the plate of food toward her. "I don't want to be alone." Samuel considered this. He couldn't leave the massacre unreported, but he also couldn't take Grace with him. The ride would be too much for her in her current state, and word of a young woman staying at his ranch would spread like wildfire. The last thing either of them needed was gossip. "I'll make it as quick as I can. While I'm gone, you can stay inside. I'll leave my rifle with you. Do you know how to use one?" "My father taught me. I'm not an expert, but I can shoot if I need to." "The door has a good bolt. Lock it after I leave and don't open it for anyone but me. When I come back, I'll call out so you know it's me." Grace nodded slowly, though Samuel could see the anxiety building in her expression. He hated leaving her, but there was no choice. He showed her how to work the bolt on the door and made sure she was comfortable handling the rifle. Then he saddled his mare and prepared to leave. "Samuel," Grace called from the doorway as he was mounting up. "Yes, please come back." The vulnerability in her voice struck him hard. "I will. I promise you, Grace, I'll be back before you know it." The ride to Breckenridge gave Samuel time to think. In the space of less than 24 hours, his solitary life had been completely upended. He'd found himself responsible for a traumatized young woman who'd lost everything and everyone she loved. The practical side of him knew this was a temporary situation. Grace would heal, and eventually she'd want to move on, maybe continue to Oregon or return east to whatever family she had left. But there was another feeling growing inside him, one he couldn't quite name yet. When he'd looked into Grace's terrified eyes yesterday, something had shifted in his chest. And when she'd asked him to come back, he'd felt a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with simple Christian charity. Breckenridge wasn't much, just a collection of rough buildings clustered around a single muddy main street. The general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a few other establishments served the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. Samuel tied his horse outside Henderson's general store and went inside. Mrs. Henderson was a sturdy woman in her 50s with gray streaked hair and kind eyes. She looked up from where she was stocking shelves and smiled. "Samuel Kincaid. Haven't seen you in town for a month at least. What brings you in?" "I need to speak with you, Mrs. Henderson. Is your husband around?" "He's in the back." "Why? What's wrong? You look troubled." Samuel quickly explained what he'd found, watching Mrs. Henderson's face grow pale as he described the massacre. When he mentioned Grace, the older woman's hand went to her heart. That poor child, losing her whole family like that. "Of course, I'll come help her. Let me get Tom to watch the store." "There's more," Samuel said. "I need you to help me report this to the authorities, and I need supplies." The woman, Grace, she has nothing but the clothes on her back, and those were ruined. She'll need dresses, undergarments, everything. Mrs. Henderson was already moving toward the back room, calling for her husband. Within minutes, Tom Henderson emerged, a tall man with a full beard and serious demeanor. Samuel repeated his story, and Tom's expression grew grim. "We'll need to organize a burial party," Tom said. "Can't leave those poor souls for the scavengers." I'll round up some men and we'll head out this afternoon." "I'm coming with you," Samuel said. "Grace gave me some details about the raiders. One of them had a burned scar on his left hand. White men, not Indians." Tom nodded. "There's been talk of a gang working this territory. The territorial marshal was through here 2 weeks ago. Said he'd heard reports of raids on isolated homesteads. This is the worst one yet, though." "When is the marshal due back?" "Not for another month at least. He covers a huge territory. But I'll write up a report and have it ready for when he returns." While Tom went to gather men for the burial party, Mrs. Henderson started pulling items from her shelves. Dresses, a warm shawl, stockings, undergarments, a hairbrush, and other essentials piled up on the counter. "She'll need these at minimum," Mrs. Henderson said. "Poor dear. What was her name again?" "Grace Zimmerman." "Zimmerman. I wonder if she's related to the Zimmermans that settled near Fort Benton a few years back. She might have family in the territory," Samuel realized. "I didn't think to ask. She said they were heading to Oregon, but maybe they have connections here. I'll ask around discreetly. In the meantime, let me pack a bag and I'll ride back with you. A young woman shouldn't be alone with a bachelor, even in these circumstances. People talk." Samuel appreciated Mrs. Henderson's practicality even as he bristled slightly at the implication. But she was right. Grace's reputation needed protection, especially if she was going to rebuild her life in Montana territory. Within the hour, Samuel and Mrs. Henderson were riding back toward the ranch, her horse carrying saddlebags full of supplies. Tom had assembled a group of 6 men who would follow later with a wagon for the bodies and tools for digging graves. "Tell me about this girl," Mrs. Henderson said as they rode. "How is she managing?" "She's terrified," Samuel said honestly. "Barely sleeps, jumps at every sound. She watched her family die, Mrs. Henderson. That's not something a person recovers from quickly." "And how are you managing? Can't be easy finding something like that on your own land." Samuel considered the question. "I've seen death before. War teaches you to stomach it, but this feels different. Those were innocent people, families, and Grace. She's so young to have suffered so much." Mrs. Henderson gave him a shrewd look. "You're already getting attached. I'm trying to help her, that's all." Hum. "Well, just remember, Samuel Kincaid, that girl has been through trauma. The last thing she needs is pressure from a man, even a good one like you." "I know that," Samuel said, perhaps more sharply than he intended. "I'm not some monster who'd take advantage of a woman in distress." "I know you're not. I'm just saying be careful, both of you." When they arrived at the ranch house, Samuel called out from a distance so Grace wouldn't be startled. The door opened cautiously and Grace appeared, still holding the rifle. Her face flooded with relief when she saw Samuel, and he felt that strange tightness in his chest again. "You came back," she said, almost wonderingly. "I told you I would. Grace, this is Mrs. Henderson from the general store in Breckenridge. She's going to stay with you for a while, help you get settled." Mrs. Henderson dismounted and approached Grace with open arms. "You poor dear. Come here." To Samuel's surprise, Grace went to her, accepting the motherly embrace. Mrs. Henderson held her while Grace cried, whispering soothing words. Samuel busied himself with the horses, giving them privacy for their grief. Later that afternoon, Tom Henderson and his burial party arrived. Samuel led them to the massacre site, leaving Mrs. Henderson with Grace at the ranch house. The work of burying the dead was grim and difficult. They found 14 bodies in total, including several children. Samuel helped dig graves, his muscles burning from the labor, while Tom searched the wagons for anything that might identify the victims. "Found some papers," Tom said, holding up a leather satchel. "Looks like the wagon master kept records. We can at least notify families back east if these folks had kin." Samuel was examining one of the wagons when something caught his eye. Carved into the wooden frame were initials. GZ plus Da, Grace's initials and someone else's. He ran his fingers over the carving, wondering about the story there. Had Grace been engaged? In love? Had that person died in the massacre? They worked until dusk, finally finishing the last grave as the sun set. Tom spoke a prayer over the mass burial, and the men stood with hats in hands, paying their respects to strangers who died violently on land that promised them new beginnings. "We'll keep an eye out for those raiders," Tom said as they packed up. "If they're still in the territory, word will spread. Someone will know something." Samuel thanked the men and watched them ride back toward Breckenridge before heading home himself. Home. It was strange how quickly he'd started thinking of the ranch as a place Grace belonged to. When he entered the house, he found it transformed. Mrs. Henderson had been busy, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. The table was set for 3, and Grace was sitting by the fire, wearing a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson must have brought. Her dark hair had been brushed and braided, and in the firelight she looked beautiful. Grace looked up when he entered, her eyes searching his face. "Did you bury them properly?" "Yes." Tom Henderson spoke words over them. "They're at peace now. Thank you." She stood, wringing her hands. "Mrs. Henderson told me she brought clothes and supplies. I can't pay you back, not now, but someday I will." "There's no debt, Grace. Consider it a gift." "That's too much. You've already done so much." Mrs. Henderson emerged from the kitchen area carrying a pot of stew. "Child, just accept the man's kindness. The Lord knows you've earned it after what you've been through. Now sit down, both of you. Dinner's ready." They ate together, the first real meal Samuel had shared with others in years. Mrs. Henderson kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation, asking Grace about her life before the massacre. Slowly, Grace began to open up. "We were from Ohio," she said. "My father was a carpenter. He'd heard there was opportunity in Oregon, land for the taking and towns being built that would need skilled craftsmen. My mother was reluctant to leave, but my sister and I were excited for the adventure." Her voice caught. "My sister was only 16. She wanted to see the ocean." "You mentioned initials carved in one of the wagons," Samuel said carefully. "Da, was that someone important to you?" Grace's expression grew distant. "David Ashford. We were engaged to be married once we reached Oregon. He was one of the first ones killed trying to defend the train." Samuel felt an unexpected stab of something dark and painful. Jealousy, he realized with shock. He had no right to feel that way, no claim on Grace at all, but the emotion was there nonetheless. Mrs. Henderson patted Grace's hand. "I'm so sorry, dear, to lose so much all at once." "I loved him," Grace said softly. "Or I thought I did. We grew up together and it seemed natural that we'd marry. But now I wonder if I really knew what love was or if I was just following the path that was expected of me." The conversation moved to other topics, and eventually Mrs. Henderson announced she was tired and would be taking the bedroom. Samuel started to protest, but the older woman cut him off. "You and Grace can figure out sleeping arrangements between you. I'm sure you'll be proper about it." After Mrs. Henderson retired, Samuel and Grace sat by the fire. The silence between them was comfortable, and Samuel found himself studying her profile in the flickering light. "Are you feeling safer?" he asked. Grace turned to look at him, and the intensity in her gaze made his breath catch. "Only when you're near. It's strange. I barely know you, but when you're in the room, I feel like nothing can hurt me. When you rode to town this morning, I was terrified the entire time. Every sound made me think the raiders had come back. But the moment I heard your voice calling out, the fear disappeared." Samuel didn't know what to say to that. He'd never had someone depend on him so completely before. That's natural after what you've been through. You'll get stronger. The fear will fade. I don't want it to fade if it means not needing you anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to explore. Samuel cleared his throat. "You should rest. I'll take the floor by the fire." Grace stood slowly. "Samuel, will you still be here in the morning?" "I'm not going anywhere, Grace. This is my home." She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Good, because it's starting to feel like mine too." Over the following days, a routine developed at the ranch. Mrs. Henderson stayed for a week, helping Grace adjust and ensuring proprieties were observed. But even with the older woman present, Samuel noticed that Grace always gravitated toward him. When he was working outside, she'd find excuses to be near the barn or the corral. When he came in for meals, her whole face would light up. And he had to admit, if only to himself, that he looked for her too. His eyes would search for her dark hair and slight frame whenever he approached the house. He found himself taking on projects closer to the house than necessary, just to be near her. Mrs. Henderson noticed, of course. One afternoon, while Grace was napping, the older woman cornered Samuel in the barn. "You're falling for her," she said without preamble. Samuel didn't bother denying it. "I know it's too soon. She's grieving, traumatized. The last thing she needs is me complicating matters. Maybe. Or maybe what she needs is something to live for, a reason to heal. That girl lights up when you're around, Samuel. I've seen enough of life to recognize love when I see it starting to bloom. It's too fast. We barely know each other." Sometimes the heart knows what the head is too slow to figure out. Just don't push her. Let things develop naturally. And for heaven's sake, be patient. She's been through hell. "I know. I won't rush her, Mrs. Henderson. I just want her to be happy." "Then you're already halfway to loving her properly." When Mrs. Henderson finally returned to Breckenridge, promising to check in regularly, Samuel and Grace were left truly alone together for the first time. Samuel expected awkwardness, but instead, a peaceful domesticity settled over the ranch. Grace took over the cooking, insisting she needed something to occupy her hands and mind. Samuel found himself coming in to meals that smelled like home, the kind he'd never had. She darned his socks, mended his shirts, and kept the house cleaner than it had been since he'd built it. In return, Samuel taught her about the ranch. She learned to milk the cow he kept for fresh dairy, to collect eggs from the chickens, and to recognize the different calls of the cattle. She proved to have a natural way with animals, fearless in a way that surprised him given her trauma. "My father kept horses in Ohio," she explained one day as she brushed Samuel's mare. "I grew up around animals. They're easier than people in many ways, more honest." "Can't argue with that," Samuel agreed, watching her gentle hands work. "You're good with her." "She usually doesn't tolerate anyone but me." Grace smiled, the expression coming more easily to her now. "She knows I'm not a threat. Animals can sense that." "Is that why you trust me? Because you sense I'm not a threat?" Grace stopped brushing and looked at him directly. "I trust you because you've proven yourself trustworthy. Every day, every action, you show me that I'm safe with you. You know how rare that is, how precious." Samuel took a step closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Grace, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "These past 2 weeks, having you here, it's changed something in me. I've lived alone for years, told myself I preferred it that way. But now when I think about going back to that, to empty rooms and silent meals, I can't bear it." Grace set down the brush, her green eyes wide. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care about you. More than I probably should, given the circumstances. And I know it's too soon, that you're still healing from everything that happened. But I needed you to know. When you're ready, when you've had time to grieve and heal, I'd like to court you properly. If you'd allow it." For a long moment, Grace just stared at him. Then she closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his scarred jaw with trembling fingers. "Samuel Kincaid, you've been courting me since the day you found me. Every kindness, every patient word, every promise kept. I may be broken, but I'm not blind. I see how you look at me, and I feel the same way. You don't have to say that. You're grateful, and that's natural, but it's not the same." As she pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "Don't tell me what I feel. I loved David, or I thought I did. But it was a girl's love, based on familiarity and expectations. What I feel for you is different. It's deeper, fiercer. When I'm with you, I don't feel broken, I feel whole, safe, cherished. Is that not love?" Samuel caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I don't want to take advantage of you, Grace. You've been through so much. Then don't take advantage, just love me, let me love you back. We'll take it slow as we need to. But don't pretend there's nothing between us. I've lost too much to waste time on pretense." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her carefully as if she might break. Grace buried her face against his chest, and he felt her whole body relax in a way it never had before. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I'll always keep you safe. I know. That's why I can finally breathe again." They stood like that for a long time, in the quiet barn with the horses shuffling in their stalls and dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. When they finally pulled apart, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer rancher and rescued woman. They were Samuel and Grace, two people finding their way toward love. The courting that followed was unconventional by any standard. They lived under the same roof, shared meals and conversation, and slowly learned the rhythms of each other's lives. To maintain propriety, Samuel made a point of riding into Breckenridge every Sunday to attend church services with Grace, Mrs. Henderson chaperoning. The gossip started immediately, but Samuel didn't care. Let people talk. He knew his intentions were honorable. Grace continued to heal, though she still had difficult days. Nightmares plagued her, and sometimes a sound or smell would send her spiraling back to the massacre. On those days, Samuel learned to simply be present, offering his steady calm until the storm passed. One evening about a month after he'd found her, Grace woke screaming from a nightmare. Samuel, who'd been dozing in his chair by the fire, was at her door in seconds. "Grace, it's me. You're safe. It was just a dream." He heard her sobbing and, throwing caution to the wind, pushed open the bedroom door. Grace was sitting up in bed, her face buried in her hands, whole body shaking. Samuel sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Can I touch you?" She nodded frantically, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried. Her fingers clutched at his shirt with desperate strength. "They were killing them again," she gasped between sobs. "My mother, my sister, David, everyone. And I was hiding, doing nothing, just listening to them die. You survived. That's not nothing. Your father saved you for a reason, Grace. You're here, you're alive, and you're stronger than you know." "I don't feel strong. I feel like a coward." Samuel pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "Listen to me. You are not a coward. You survived a massacre, alone for days. You trusted a stranger when every instinct must have told you to hide. You got on a horse and came to a strange place. You wake up every morning and choose to live, to heal, to try again. That's courage, Grace. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." She searched his face in the dim light from the fireplace. "How did I get so lucky to have you find me?" "I think I'm the lucky one," Samuel said honestly. "You've brought life back to this place, to me. I was just existing before you came. Now I'm living again." Grace leaned her forehead against his. "Stay with me tonight. Just sit with me until I fall back asleep." "Of course." Samuel sat with his back against the headboard, Grace curled against his side until her breathing evened out into sleep. Then he carefully extracted himself and returned to his chair by the fire, but something had changed. The walls between them were crumbling, and Samuel found he didn't want to rebuild them. As spring turned to summer, the ranch flourished. Samuel's cattle fattened on the rich Montana grass, and he began making plans to expand his herd. Grace's garden, planted with seeds Mrs. Henderson had provided, grew abundant with vegetables. They worked side by side, building a life together without ever formally acknowledging that's what they were doing. In June, news came that the territorial marshal had been through Breckenridge. Tom Henderson rode out to the ranch with the update. "Marshall says they tracked the raiding gang to Wyoming territory," Tom reported. "Got into a gunfight with them near Sheridan. 3 of the gang were killed, the rest scattered. He doesn't think they'll be operating in Montana anymore." Grace, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Did any of them have a burned scar on their left hand?" Tom nodded grimly. "One of the dead ones did. Marshall wanted to know if you'd be willing to identify the body." Samuel saw Grace pale and immediately stepped closer to her. "Is that necessary, Tom?" Grace gave her statement already. "Marshall said it would help close the case, but I told him it was a lot to ask of the lady. He said he'd understand if she couldn't." Grace straightened her shoulders. "I'll do it. Those men killed my family. The least I can do is make sure they face justice, even if it's just identifying them after they're dead." "You don't have to," Samuel said quietly. "Yes, I do. For my parents, for my sister, for David. They deserve that much." The trip to Breckenridge to meet with the marshal was difficult for Grace, but Samuel was proud of how she handled herself. She looked at the body of the man with the scarred hand and confirmed he'd been one of the raiders. The marshal thanked her and said the case would be closed. On the ride back to the ranch, Grace was quiet. When they finally arrived home, she turned to Samuel. "I need to tell you something. When I looked at that man's body, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no satisfaction that he was dead, nothing. Is that wrong?" "Shouldn't I feel glad he got what he deserved?" Samuel helped her down from the horse. "There's no right way to feel, Grace. You've been through trauma that would break most people. However you feel is valid. I just feel empty, like closing the case didn't close anything inside me. The grief is still there. The loss. Nothing changed. Justice doesn't bring people back," Samuel said gently. "It's just a word we use to make ourselves feel better about things we can't control. But healing, that's different. That comes from inside, from choosing to live despite the pain." Grace looked at him with such love in her eyes that Samuel's breath caught. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I've just lived long enough to learn a few hard truths." She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I want to marry you, Samuel Kincaid." Samuel froze. "Grace, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. I love you. Not because you saved me, not because I'm grateful, but because you're good and kind and patient. Because you see me, really see me, not just the broken parts. Because when I think about my future, you're in every vision. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you, if you'll have me." Samuel pulled her close, his heart pounding. "If I'll have you, Grace, I've been yours since the moment I looked into your eyes beneath that wagon. I just didn't want to rush you. I'm not rushing. I'm choosing. There's a difference. Will you marry me, Samuel?" He laughed, the sound full of joy. "That's supposed to be my line, but yes, Grace Zimmerman, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Let's do it properly. Talk to the Reverend in Breckenridge. Have the bands read. Give people time to get used to the idea. I want to be your wife in the eyes of God and the law." They were married on a bright August morning in the small church in Breckenridge. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious about the rancher and the wagon train survivor who'd found love in tragedy. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears, and declared it the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. Tom Henderson stood up as Samuel's best man, and Mrs. Henderson served as Grace's matron of honor. Grace wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and Samuel wore his best suit, brushed and cleaned for the occasion. When he saw Grace walking down the aisle toward him, Samuel felt his eyes sting with tears. She was beautiful, radiant, and she'd chosen him. The Reverend spoke about love enduring through trials, about two people finding each other when they needed it most. When it came time for the vows, Samuel's voice was steady and sure. I, Samuel Kincaid, take you, Grace Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to cherish you, protect you, and love you for all my days. In sickness and health, in joy and sorrow, I will be yours. Grace's voice trembled slightly, but her eyes never left his. I, Grace Zimmerman, take you, Samuel Kincaid, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. You saved my life, and now I give it back to you freely as a gift. I am yours always. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed her gently, aware of all the watching eyes but caring only about the woman in his arms. Grace kissed him back with a passion that made a few of the older ladies gasp, and Samuel couldn't help but smile against her lips. The wedding celebration was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and food contributed by half the town. Samuel watched Grace laugh and dance with the other women, looking happier than he'd ever seen her. She caught him watching and broke away from the group, coming to his side. "Happy, Mrs. Kincaid?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again. Thank you, Samuel. For what? For finding me, for saving me, for loving me." "I think you saved me too, Grace. I just didn't know I needed saving until you came along." As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Samuel and Grace stood together watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. This was their land now, their home, their future. The past, with all its pain and loss, would always be part of Grace's story, but it no longer defined her. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Samuel held his wife close. Grace had been nervous about the physical intimacy of marriage, worried that her trauma might make it difficult. But Samuel was patient and gentle, letting her set the pace. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with tenderness and love that made Grace cry tears of joy. "I love you," she whispered against his chest afterward. "I didn't think I could feel this whole again." "I love you too. And Grace, you were never broken, you were always whole. You just needed time to remember it." The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments and growth. Grace threw herself into making the ranch a true home, while Samuel worked to expand their holdings. By the following spring, Grace was pregnant with their first child. The pregnancy was difficult at first. Grace suffered from terrible morning sickness that left her weak and tired. Samuel worried constantly, hovering until Grace finally had to tell him to give her space to breathe. But as her belly grew and she felt the baby move, a peace settled over her that Samuel recognized as healing. "I think it's going to be a boy," she said one evening, her hand on her swollen stomach. "He kicks like a mule." "A son," Samuel said wonderingly, placing his own hand beside hers. "What should we name him?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to name him Thomas after Tom Henderson. He helped bury my family and give them dignity. And his middle name could be David, for the man I was supposed to marry. I want to honor the past while looking to the future." Samuel kissed her temple. "Thomas David Kincaid. It's a strong name." Their son was born in January during a brutal snowstorm that trapped them at the ranch for days. Mrs. Henderson had planned to be there for the birth, but the weather made travel impossible. Samuel found himself delivering his own child with only Grace's instructions to guide him. You can do this, Grace panted between contractions. Just like you've done everything else. I trust you. I'm just a rancher, Grace. I don't know anything about birthing babies. Then learn fast, she gasped as another contraction hit. Hours later, when Samuel held his newborn son for the first time, he felt something fundamental shift inside him. This tiny, red-faced creature represented everything good that had come from tragedy. He was proof that life continued, that love could bloom even in the darkest soil. "He's perfect," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. Grace, exhausted but smiling, reached for the baby. "Let me see him." Samuel placed their son in her arms and watched as Grace examined every finger and toe. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered. "I'm your mama. And that big, strong man over there is your papa. We're going to love you so much." The years that followed brought more children. A daughter named Alina came 2 years after Thomas, then another son they named William. The ranch prospered under Samuel's careful management, and Grace became known throughout the territory for her kindness and generosity. She never forgot where she'd come from or what she'd survived. When word came of other wagon train attacks or families left destitute by raids, Grace was the first to offer help. She organized relief efforts, took in orphaned children temporarily, and became a voice for victims of violence throughout Montana territory. "You don't have to take on everyone's pain," Samuel told her one night after she'd spent the day helping a widow whose husband had been killed in a mining accident. "I know what it's like to lose everything," Grace said simply. "If I can ease someone else's burden even a little, I have to try." "You taught me that, Samuel. When you found me broken and afraid, you could have just taken me to town and washed your hands of the whole situation. But you didn't. You stayed with me, helped me heal, loved me back to life. I'm just paying that forward." Samuel pulled her close. "Have I told you lately that you're the strongest person I know? Only about a dozen times a day, but I never get tired of hearing it." On their 10th anniversary, Samuel took Grace back to the ravine where he'd found her. She'd asked to go, wanting to face the place that had changed her life so dramatically. The grave markers Tom Henderson and his men had placed were still standing, weathered but intact. Grace stood silently for a long time, then knelt and placed wildflowers on each grave. "Thank you," she whispered, "for loving me, for raising me, for giving me life. I hope I've made you proud. I hope you can see that I didn't just survive. I've truly lived." Samuel stood back, giving her space for her grief and remembrance. When she finally stood and turned to him, her eyes were wet but her smile was genuine. "I'm ready to go home now. Are you all right?" "I am. I needed to come here one last time to say goodbye properly. They'll always be part of me, but I don't need to carry the weight of their loss anymore. I have you, our children, our life. I choose to focus on that." They rode back to the ranch together, Grace's hand resting on Samuel's thigh as they moved in comfortable rhythm. The ranch had grown substantially over the years. They now had a larger house, a new barn, and several hired hands who helped with the cattle. But Samuel still remembered how it had looked that first day he'd brought Grace home, how terrified and broken she'd been. That night, after putting the children to bed, Samuel and Grace sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments together at the end of long days. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked. "Marrying me, staying here instead of going on to Oregon like you'd planned?" Grace turned to look at him, her expression incredulous. "Regret? Samuel, you gave me back my life. This ranch, our children, this is everything I never knew I needed. Oregon was someone else's dream. This is mine. I just want you to be happy. I am happy. Happier than I ever imagined I could be. Do you know what the worst part of that massacre was, besides losing my family? It was thinking that I'd never feel safe again. that I'd spend the rest of my life afraid, looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. But you changed that. From the very beginning, when you were near, I felt protected, safe, and that feeling never went away. It just grew into something deeper. Love, trust, partnership. You're my home, Samuel Kincaid. Not this ranch, not Montana, you. Samuel kissed her then, pouring 10 years of love and devotion into it. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. I found you on the worst day of your life, Samuel said. But you made every day after the best of mine. More years passed. Their children grew strong and healthy. Thomas proved to be a natural rancher, taking to the work with the same passion his father had. Elena inherited her mother's kindness and her father's steady nature, becoming a teacher in Breckenridge. William, the youngest, was wild and adventurous, already talking about exploring the territories further west. Grace's hair started showing threads of silver, and Samuel's face gained more lines from years of sun and hard work. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and the life they'd built together. On a warm summer evening when Samuel was 52 and Grace 44, they sat on their porch as they always did. Their children were grown now. Thomas married with children of his own, Elena engaged to the doctor in Breckenridge, William working as a scout for the army. "We did good, didn't we?" Grace said, her head resting on Samuel's shoulder. "We did better than good. We built something real, something that will last long after we're gone." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember what I said to you that first week after you found me? That I only felt safe when you were near. I remember. It's still true. After all these years, after all we've been through, you're still my safe place. The calm in every storm, my anchor." Samuel tightened his arm around her. "And you're still the bravest person I know, the strongest, the most beautiful, inside and out." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over land they'd made their own through hard work and dedication. In the distance, they could see Thomas riding the fence line with his oldest son. The cycle of life continuing, new generations taking over while old ones watched with pride. "I love you, Grace Kincaid," Samuel said softly. "I love you too, Samuel. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for showing me that even after the worst tragedy, life can still be beautiful. Thank you for teaching me that a house isn't a home until there's love in it. You brought light into my darkness, Grace. Every single day with you has been a gift." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Samuel thought back to that day 20 years ago when he'd followed the buzzards to a ravine on his northern boundary. He'd expected to find death and had found life instead. He discovered a woman who would become his everything, his partner, his love, his reason for waking up each morning with purpose and joy. Grace had survived a massacre, yes, but more than that, she'd thrived. She'd taken her pain and transformed it into compassion, her loss into a determination to help others. Together, they'd built not just a ranch but a legacy of love and kindness that would ripple through generations. The Montana wilderness that had once seemed so lonely now felt full of life and possibility. Their grandchildren's laughter echoed through the house on Sunday dinners. Their land supported not just their family, but the hired hands and their families too. The ranch was a community now, built on the foundation Samuel and Grace had laid together. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, noticing his contemplative silence. "I'm thinking about how one day changed everything. If I hadn't decided to ride that northern fence line, if I'd gone a different direction, if I'd missed the buzzards circling, our paths never would have crossed. You'd have died in that ravine and I'd still be alone in this house, existing but not truly living. But you did ride that way. You did find me. Some things are meant to be, Samuel. I truly believe that. All the pain, all the loss, it led me to you. And I wouldn't change it, not if changing it meant losing what we have. Not even to have your family back. Grace considered this seriously. I'll always grieve for them. Always miss them. But I also know they'd want me to be happy, to have the life I've built. My father died saving me. That gift, that sacrifice, it would be wasted if I spent my life mourning instead of living. So no, I wouldn't change it. This life with you, it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. Samuel kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Even after 20 years, the simple act of holding her filled him with contentment. As the night deepened and the air grew cooler, they finally went inside. The house that Samuel had built as a bachelor now held memories in every corner. The kitchen where Grace had learned to cook his favorite meals. The bedroom where all 3 of their children had been born. The fireplace where they'd spent countless evenings reading, talking, simply being together. That night, lying in bed with Grace curled against his side, Samuel reflected on the unexpected journey his life had taken. He'd come west to escape the memories of war, to find peace in solitude. Instead, he'd found something infinitely better. Purpose, family, and a love so deep it had transformed him completely. Grace stirred in her sleep, and Samuel instinctively held her closer. Even in sleep, she sought his presence, his protection. And he would give it gladly for as long as he drew breath. She was his heart, his home, his everything. The years continued to pass gently. Samuel and Grace grew old together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The ranch eventually passed to Thomas, who ran it with the same dedication his father had. But Samuel and Grace remained active and involved, beloved figures who'd become legends in their own right. The story of how they'd met, how a rancher had found a woman who'd escaped a massacre, and how their love had grown from tragedy, became part of local folklore. Young couples would look to Samuel and Grace as examples of true partnership, of love that endured through hardship and flourished in peace. On their 40th anniversary, the whole territory seemed to celebrate with them. A party was held at the ranch that lasted 3 days, with people coming from as far as Wyoming to honor the couple who'd become institutions in Montana. Grace, now 64 with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes, stood beside Samuel as he gave a speech thanking everyone for coming. When it was her turn to speak, she took his hand and addressed the crowd with the same strength that had carried her through so much. 40 years ago, I lost everything, she said, her voice carrying across the assembled guests. My family, my fiancé, my future as I'd imagined it. I was prepared to die in that ravine, alone and broken. But this man, this wonderful, stubborn, gentle man, he found me. He didn't just save my life. He gave me a reason to live it. He showed me that safety isn't about the absence of danger. It's about having someone who will stand with you against whatever comes. Samuel has been that person for me every single day for 40 years. He's been my strength when I was weak, my courage when I was afraid, my joy when grief threatened to overwhelm me. I love you, Samuel Kincaid, more today than I did 40 years ago, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for keeping me. Thank you for loving me. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd as Samuel pulled Grace into his arms and kissed her, their love as evident at 64 and 72 as it had been when they were young. As the celebration wound down and the guests departed, Samuel and Grace once again found themselves on their porch, watching the stars. It had become their sacred ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. You remember that first night? Samuel asked. When I promised I'd keep the fire going and stay at the table so you'd know you weren't alone, I remember. I was so scared of everything except you. Even terrified and broken, some part of me recognized that you were safe, that you'd protect me. And you only felt safe when I was near." "Still do," Grace said with a smile. "Some things never change. You're still my safe place, Samuel. My home." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd lived a lifetime together and still found peace in each other's presence. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above them, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. Samuel thought about the young man he'd been, returning from war broken and seeking solitude. He thought about the woman he'd found, terrified and traumatized, but possessing a core of strength that had drawn him like a moth to flame. And he thought about everything that had come after: the courtship, the wedding, the children, the years of hard work and harder lessons, the joy and sorrow that made up a life fully lived. "No regrets?" he asked Grace, the question he'd asked her countless times over the years. "Not a single one," she replied, as she always did. "This life with you, it's been everything, more than I ever dreamed possible." Samuel Kincaid died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, Grace beside him as she'd been for 52 years. He passed in the house he'd built, on the land he'd loved, surrounded by the family he'd created with the woman who'd changed everything. Grace held his hand as he drew his last breath, whispering words of love that only he could hear. And though her heart broke at losing him, she knew with absolute certainty that their love would endure beyond death. It was too strong, too deep, too fundamental to who they both were to simply end. She lived another 3 years, cared for lovingly by her children and grandchildren. In those years, she often spoke of Samuel, keeping his memory alive with stories of their life together. She told the grandchildren about how their grandfather had saved her, how he'd shown her that safety wasn't about the absence of fear, but about having someone to face it with. When Grace finally passed at 87, it was with Samuel's name on her lips and a smile on her face. Her children buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, "Samuel and Grace Kincaid." Two souls who found each other in darkness and created light. The ranch continued through generations, each one hearing the story of how it all began. How a rancher following buzzards had found a woman hiding beneath a wagon, terrified and broken. How he'd brought her home and shown her patience and kindness until she healed. How she'd only felt safe when he was near, and how that feeling had blossomed into a love that became legendary. The story of Samuel and Grace became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of love to heal, to restore, to transform. It showed that even the darkest tragedy could lead to unexpected joy, that broken things could be mended, and that sometimes the worst day of your life could lead directly to the best. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the land in Montana, carrying on the legacy of hard work, kindness, and enduring love that Samuel and Grace established. The ranch stands as a monument to what two people can build when they commit to each other completely, when they choose love even in the face of loss and pain. And on quiet summer evenings, if you stand on the porch of that ranch house and listen carefully, some say you can still feel their presence. The protective strength of a man who saved a woman and gave her reason to live again. The quiet courage of a woman who survived the unsurvivable and chose to thrive. Two souls who found each other against all odds and created something beautiful that would last far beyond their mortal years. Their story reminds us that safety isn't about the absence of danger. It's about having someone who stands beside you, who holds you through the storms, who makes you feel protected even when the world is chaos. Samuel was that for Grace, and Grace was that for Samuel. They saved each other, healed each other, and loved each other with a devotion that still inspires everyone who hears their tale. From tragedy came triumph. From fear came courage. From loss came love. And from a chance meeting in a Montana ravine came a legacy that would endure for generations, proving that sometimes the most broken people can create the most beautiful lives when they find someone who shows them they're worth saving. The Kincaid Ranch still stands, a testament to Samuel and Grace's enduring love. And every person who works that land, who walks those fields, who sits on that porch watching the stars, carries a piece of their story forward. Because true love never really ends. It transforms, evolves, continues through the lives it touches and the legacy it creates. Samuel Kincaid found a woman who'd escaped a wagon train massacre. She only felt safe when he was near. From that simple beginning came a love story for the ages, proving that even in the wild and dangerous West, even after unimaginable tragedy, love could not just survive but flourish, creating beauty from ashes and hope from despair. Their story was complete, their lives fully lived, their love eternally sealed. And that truly was the happiest ending of all.